What's going on? Alex here, and today I'm going to talk about the tax implications of forming an S-corporation in California. Now, forming an S-corporation is a bit of a misnomer because you can't actually form an S-corporation at the state level. But what you can do is form a business entity, then make an election to have it treated as an S-corporation for income tax purposes. Now, don't worry if none of what I just said makes sense, because in this video, I'm going to show you step by step how to form a business entity, how to make the S-corporation election, and how to maintain that election moving forward. Now, before we get started, I want to mention that none of the information presented in this video is legal advice or tax advice. So definitely consult with a qualified attorney and or tax professional before acting on any of the information presented in this video. Now, this video is going to be split into different sections. So if you want to skip ahead to any particular part of the video, I'm going to include links in the video description, which will allow you to do so. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Now, what better way to learn about S-corporations than with a handy dandy spreadsheet? Let's take a look. All right, so here in the spreadsheet, I've outlined some of the important points of forming and maintaining an S-corporation. As you can see, they're highlighted in bold here, and there's quite a few of them. They go A to J, so we're going to touch on each point one by one. Now, the first item on the list here is form a business entity. Now, let's talk about this one for a bit. Unfortunately, you can't go to the state of California and say, I want to start an S-corporation. That choice simply does not exist, all right? Instead, you have to form another type of business entity, be it an LLC, limited liability company, or a corporation, or a limited liability partnership, what have you. But you have to choose one of those business structures, none of which is an S-corporation. As I mentioned, an S-corporation election is what gives you that treatment, but that happens after the business entity is formed. And that brings up the question, which business entity should I form? There's really two important considerations to take into account where you're choosing a business entity type. Now, the first question is the legal side of things, and the next question is the income tax side of things, okay? So let's talk about the legal side for a second. First of all, what kind of business entity is even available to you? Because as a CPA in California, I cannot legally form an LLC for my business. I have to form a professional corporation, which is what California allows CPAs working in that capacity to work as. I don't have LLC as a choice. So you have to consider all of those different rules and regulations based on your industry, based on your location, because different rules might stipulate which forms of business entity are available for you and which are not. Now, once you have that conversation with a qualified attorney, they should also be able to touch on limited liability, which is one of the common reasons that business owners put an entity in place in the first place. And the question there is, in which situations do you have limited liability and in which situations do you not? And this is a common question that I get, and I immediately have to refer clients to speak with an attorney because the concept of limited liability and legal liability, those are legal concepts, so I can't comment on them. I'm not an attorney myself. But it's an important consideration, an important conversation to have with a qualified attorney who would be able to guide you in that regard to show you exactly when you may be protected and in situations where you may not. So having that conversation from a legal perspective is extremely important because it'll allow you to narrow down your options in many cases in terms of what sort of business entity you want to have at the state level. And depending on what options you have available on the legal side, that may limit the options that you have on the tax side. So for example, if you form a single member LLC at the state level, meaning an LLC with just one owner, then you can report the income and expenses for that business on Schedule C of your Form 1040. So you're filing only one tax return, being your personal income tax return, and then you're attaching a schedule to it to report your income and expenses for the business. Now let's say that instead of an LLC, you formed a corporation. Now your options may be a bit more limited because you no longer have the option of reporting the income and expenses on Schedule C of Form 1040. That's out of the question now. Instead, you're going to need to file Form 1120 to report the income and expenses pertaining to that corporation. Now, if you make the S-corporation election, then you can have it treated as an S-corporation, but you're still filing Form 1120S, which is a separate tax return in addition to your personal return. And this is a point of confusion for a lot of business owners. You can have an LLC, which is a limited liability company, and then make the S-corporation election to have it treated as an S-corporation for tax purposes. So this confuses business owners because they have an LLC at the state level, but now they're being treated as an S-corporation. It's kind of weird, but that's the way it works. Similarly, you can form a corporation at the state level, make the S-corporation election, and then have it treated as an S-corporation for income tax purposes. So even though you didn't form an S-corporation, you now essentially have an S-corporation from an income tax perspective. Now, a similar thing will happen with a limited liability partnership. You can have an LLP at the state level, but then make the election to have it treated as an S-corporation for income tax purposes. So it's a little bit confusing in that respect, but you need to understand that the nature of your business from a legal state perspective does not necessarily correspond to its classification for income tax purposes. You have some freedom on the income tax side to make certain elections to have your business treated as an entity other than what it was formed as at the state level. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's a common point of confusion. So once you have the legal questions set, the legal structure set, then it's wise to take a look at the income tax implications and see what's available there. But the crucial first step is to form that business entity so you could then make the S-corporation election. And a common question is, well, hey, I've run my business as a sole proprietor. Can't I just make the S-corporation election for myself? Unfortunately, the answer to that is no. You can't be an individual who then makes the S-corporation election to have yourself treated as an S-corporation. You need a business entity. So at the very least, you need an LLC, LLP, a corporation, and then you can make the S-corporation election for that entity. Now let's take a look at what forming a business entity actually entails in California. Now, if you're forming an LLC, you're going to be filing articles of organization, okay? That's going to be the organizational document for your limited liability company. Let's take a look at what that looks like. And by the way, all the links that are in the spreadsheet, I'm going to include them in the video description so you can navigate directly to the websites that I'm showing you here, make it easy for you. All right, so on this site, California does a wonderful job of presenting all the required forms. So let's go to Limited Liability Company, California Domestic, just for now. And we have formation, articles of organization. Let's click this. And while we're here, let's also note that it's a $70 filing fee. So California always has to take a cut. All right. And as we can see here, this is a relatively straightforward form, nothing too scary. This is the Secretary of State articles of organization for limited liability companies. And they want the LLC name, business addresses, information regarding service of process, what the management's going to look like, and so forth. So nothing really scary here, pretty straightforward. And once this is filed by either yourself, if you're doing this on your own, or by your attorney, they should typically take care of this for you. Now, once this is filed, you'll be able to take a look at it on the California Secretary of State website. Let's take a look at what that looks like. And this will allow you to just confirm that it's been filed, it's been received, and you're all good. So if we go here, and again, link is going to be in the video description for you. So let's take a look at LLCs. Let's just type in design. And as you can see here is a list of LLCs here in California. Let's just take a look at 344. And here you can see that the registration statement is right online. It's public information. So let's take a quick look at that. And here are the articles of organization. So that's how that's going to work. There's going to be a date here. And this is going to be the essentially effective date for your entity. So definitely take a look at that. For corporations, the process is similar, but instead you're going to be filing articles of incorporation, okay? And let's take a look at what that looks like. We'll go back to this handy dandy site here. Let's click on Corporations Domestic, California. And then we have this general stock one. And let's just note that there's a $100 filing fee for this one. Let's see what that form looks like. And similar to the articles of organization, you're going to see that it's not too scary. All right, pretty general here. We've got articles of incorporation of a general stock corporation. We got the name of the business, business addresses, information regarding service of process. Pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy. And similarly, once this is filed, you're generally able to take a look at the California Secretary of State website just to see that it's been received and that you're all good there. And let's take a look at what that would look like. All right, so back here on the business search site, let's take a look at corporations this time. Let's type in design, and you can see that here's a list of corporations, and a lot of these have been suspended or dissolved. I mean, none of these are actually active at the moment. Let's see if we can find an active one. Okay, all right, so Alberg Design Fleet of San Francisco Bay. Let's take a look here. And as you can see, all of these documents are available except the registration statement. Apparently it's not available. It was formed in 1963, so they're probably still uploading those records. But anyway, you get the idea. Let's see if we can actually find an active entity here for which the articles of incorporation are available. Let's look at Angels for Industry Design Engineers. All right, and this was 68. Okay, I'm not having any luck here, so we're going to move on. All righty, so let's go back to our spreadsheet. To summarize, to form a business entity, if you're looking at LLCs, there's articles of organization that you can file, and the articles of incorporation are applicable to corporations. So if that's the business entity type you're putting together, that's what you're going to have to form. Again, this is too early for us to talk about the S-corporation election yet because we're just forming the business entity. Now you might be wondering, how long is it going to take for California to process my articles of incorporation or articles of organization? That's a great question. California has a site for that as well, if you can believe it. So let's pull up this link here, and you can see that depending on the entity type, let's just look at limited liability company filings. They'll tell you that we are currently processing requests received via the following methods on the date indicated. So I'm filming this on the 21st or 22nd, depending on whether I want to acknowledge if this is 2 in the morning or not. And you can see that for formations or registrations, they're processing ones that they received essentially a week ago online and about 11 days ago if it's in person. So typically this will be filed online, so you can wait for about a week for this to be actually processed and show up on the site. So the next thing you want to take into account is the Statement of Information. Now, a Statement of Information is a document that gives California more info on the business entity that you formed, so later they can track you down and haunt your dreams if you owe them even $1 in tax. I'm kidding. I'm not totally kidding. But the Statement of Information for LLCs and corporations generally needs to be filed within 90 days of the registration date of the entity. So for LLCs, let's take a look at what the Statement of Information actually entails. All right, let's open this up. Okay, so as you can see here, the Statement of Information must be filed within 90 days of registering with the California Secretary of State and every 2 years thereafter. And there's a 6-month filing period to make it as difficult as possible to figure out when you need to file this thing. But just keep in mind, every 2 years, the Statement of Information needs to be filed. All right. And similarly, for corporations, there's also a Statement of Information that you need to file, but there's an important distinction being that for corporations, it must be filed within 90 days of registering with the California Secretary of State and every year thereafter. And of course, there's also a 6-month filing period that makes this a little bit more confusing than it needs to be, but you can kind of see it laid out here right at the beginning of the form. And taking a look at the Statement of Information itself, nothing too crazy here. As you can see, it asks for the corporation name, business addresses, officers, directors, information for service of process, and so forth. So nothing too crazy here. It's a bit more detailed than the articles of incorporation or articles of organization, but it just gives California a little bit more background about your business. It's also important to keep in mind that there is the ability to file a statement of no change, which is a simplified version of the Statement of Information. And the Statement of No Change can be filed in any year except that first year. So let's say that you filed your first Statement of Information within 90 days of registration, and then you're required to file one 2 years thereafter. Instead of filing a new Statement of Information, you can file a Statement of No Change, which is a simplified version of the Statement of Information, but it just allows you to get the form filed that much more simply. So let's take a look at what the Statement of No Change looks like for corporations. And we can pull up the form here. All right, and if we scroll down, you can see that in many ways it's similar to a Statement of Information, but instead it has a paragraph here that says there's been no change in the information contained in the previous Statement of Information filed with the California Secretary of State. Okay, so it's a little bit more streamlined of a filing. So if nothing's changed pertaining to your corporation or your LLC, you may be able to file a Statement of No Change. There is still a filing fee associated with it because at the end of the day, we are in California, but it's a bit more streamlined way to get that handled.